Matters. I'm your host, Roger Morris, and today I'm pleased to be joined by my other co-host, Ashton. Ashton, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Roger. How are you today?
I'm not too bad. It's springtime here in Kentucky now, so allergies, lots of yard work. That's really been my life outside of banking compliance nowadays. How about you?
Yeah, I recently was ill myself, and I think that it had a lot to do with allergies. But I have to tell you, I recently have taken up a hobby.
Oh,
It is not outdoors though, so this is perfect timing. My life doesn't work in seasons, right? So, we did a cookie booth. I'm a Girl Scout troop leader.
great.
It always comes up, right? We did a cookie booth at a roller derby bout a few weeks ago, and
Okay.
fast forward, starting in June, I'm going to be doing roller derby,
Wow.
and I'm so excited.
Well, I'm embarrassed to note that I can't even roller skate. So I could use some lessons, but isn't that a little violent? Isn't that a little physical?
Oh, it's full contact. Yeah, it's really aggressive. So I think it's going to make me a better person in my actual life because I'll have this outlet. So yeah, and I actually hadn't been on skates since I was probably 9. So my daughter and I went to the local roller rink last week to give it a shot, which I guess when you sign up for roller derby, they'll like teach you absolutely everything, which is great, even how to skate.
Okay.
So it really didn't matter. But to kind of prepare myself and not make a total fool out of myself, we went and it was really fun. I didn't fall at all. My 9-year-old did a lot.
I would
And
say,
so I thought it was hilarious at the end. She's like, wow, I'm really good at this. And I was like, all right.
well, do they have a youth league? Can she get involved?
I think some areas do, but
Well,
we don't. But yeah, she probably could use some outlets for the aggression too, because her hormones are off
if
the charts.
well, speaking of kids sports, I have a 15-month-old boy, and we recently got him like these little pair of like golf set. I don't play golf. I don't know how he ended up with this, but like a golf set, and all he does when he gets home is just goes golf, and he grabs his golf club and just runs around the house, smacking basketball, soccer ball. He's getting ready. He'll be ready.
Great. Great. My husband does golf, and I think that that's probably pretty close to what he does too. Any of
It's
them.
too boring for me. So I guess it wouldn't be too bad if in 10 years I'm dropping him off for 18 holes for 3 or 4 hours on a weekend or something. But not for me.
Yeah, but gosh, Roger, imagine if he ends up super good and he's a child prodigy and makes it to the PGA Tour, you have to walk around and watch that like all stinking day.
Well, that is a
It's like
drawback.
worst case scenario.
Yeah. And if you go to like the Masters or something, you can't even have your phone on you. I mean, there's no, you have to watch the golf.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a rule. Oh my
Yeah, the
gosh.
big tournaments. Yeah.
Okay, so I think you need to push a different hobby for your kid.
It's your,
The risk is too great. Speaking of risks, so today I thought we could talk about one of what I would consider the lowest risk regulations
okay.
ever. Just curious, Roger, what do you think is the lowest risk reg, like in your opinion?
Is it the Safe Act?
Spoiler alert, you already knew. Yeah, so safe act. So we all think it's really dumb. And so I don't know if you knew this about me, Roger, but in a past life, I did licensing for a mortgage company.
I did not.
So I feel like I have gotten to know the NMLS database on a really like intimate level that I'm not really comfortable with. So, but the Safe Act is really interesting because it is super low risk. My guess is that most consumers don't even know that the NMLS database exists, and that was kind of the point, right? To make sure that consumers had a place they could go and make sure they weren't doing business with someone shady.
Right.
But I don't personally think it played out that way because my guess is no one looks. And really, I just use it to creep and see like how many different last names someone has had, like how many times have they been divorced. So, a fun fact, you can do that. But what's really interesting about the SAFE Act is that for such a low risk regulation, it has a lot of requirements that really aren't regular, I feel like, for a regulation of that risk level.
Okay.
So for instance, like you have to have a Safe Act policy. Did you know like a lot of regs, like it's, strongly recommended, but it's not explicitly required, unlike the Safe Act policy where you have to have policies, procedures if applicable to your institution. But the reg even goes into like what needs to be in your policy.
Well, that's a little
So
unusual for a regulation, right?
it is. It's weird, and it like even more weird because, like I said, this regulation is not something that matters. Like auditors look at it, and probably new examiners, kind of similar to the CRA public file, right? Like nobody cares, but it's there in writing. So you have to have a policy, which is wild. You also have to have an annual audit, or an annual review of your Safe Act compliance. So again, super weird because not a ton of regs, some yes, but not a ton require annual audits. And
Right.
those that do are more important than Safe Act.
Yeah, that is weird. And I'm sure whenever they're going over these, they're trying to dust off the cobwebs, like what exactly needs to go into this? Because it doesn't come up super often. And I can tell you, I mean, we get questions about Safe Act in general hotline, but really not that often.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so overall, the banks need to register their folks who act as a mortgage loan originator. That definition is pretty broad. We see a lot of folks registering like their loan assistants, or folks that maybe probably don't actually meet the definition, but better safe than sorry because the fee is like $50 a year. So that's a lot cheaper than a violation, right? So they go ahead and register these folks. You have to update the registry within 30 days of making a change. So that could be like terminating the employee. You have to have them out of there within 30 days. If they go through like a name change or something like that, you're supposed to have those updates made within 30 days. You have to renew them every year. But really, the pieces that get me about Safe Act are that the policy thing and the annual audit. Like it's just so unusual.
That is a little bizarre. Well, speaking of bizarre, can we talk CRA for a second?
Yeah, we all agree that's bizarre.
Yeah, well, it's been a whirlwind the last few weeks. We were a month ago this time, or I guess when this comes out, a little over a month ago, we were all getting ready for the first wave of the new CRA rule requirements. The public file. It was coming up on April 1st. And then all of a sudden, a few days before, the regulators reversed course. And we talked about this last time because it had just happened. They said, no, we're going to push everything back to January 1st, 2026, when the rest of the rule was going into effect. And, everyone was asking about public file. Where does it need to go on the website? Is it just one file? What form? Can it be in a link? I mean, there were all sorts of questions. But, they did the ultimate, like we said, the ultimate April Fool's Day joke and delayed it. Well, the fun did not stop there. After we had recorded and got this episode out, our very own Texas Bankers Association and a few others had filed a lawsuit challenging the CRA rule. Well, they were granted a preliminary injunction. So that means that that federal banking agencies were enjoined from enforcing the final rule in its entirety against the plaintiffs, so members of the TBA and the other organizations that filed the suit. So in the meantime, the existing CRA regulations will remain in effect, but the new rule is kind of in flux. We don't know what's going to happen yet while this lawsuit is pending. So I do want to, kind of explain what an injunction is, a preliminary injunction. So this means the court determined that, the plaintiffs have, a substantial likelihood of prevailing on the merits. So that put everything else on hold. That does not necessarily mean they're going to win in the lawsuit down the road, but the judges ruled they at least do have a case to proceed. And then we might be looking at prolonged litigation here. Whatever happens might get appealed. So it may end up delaying that January 1st, 2026 date down the road. Not guaranteed, but that could happen.
Yeah. So, what are you telling banks to reach out and ask? Like, what kind of preparation should they be doing? Should they put everything on halt? Or because there are some pieces that you like opt in and it has to do with some of the more calculation-y kind of pieces, right? So,
Right.
should banks still think about looking at those things, or should they just kind of focus on other aspects?
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't want to get into too much detail on the specific parts of the CRA rule, but I mean, they definitely should not, move it to the back of their minds. They should proceed as of now as if it will go into effect January 1st, 2026. There's no indication at the moment that that's not going to happen. There's just the possibility that, I guess they could proceed on the merits and it's delayed, overturned, what have you. But for the moment, be preparing for 2026 as you have been. I'm sure a lot of banks already have their public file stuff ready. They were most people we work with were ready to go April 1st, so they'll have it ready January 1st, 2026.
Like some of them, right?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, we're definitely getting questions the day before. Like, I still need to do this, but
yeah. Well, and I think I would kind of echo that, like, definitely be prepared. But what I'm telling my banks too is that the new CRA does still kind of build on the old CRA. So I
Right.
think this is a great time to make sure you have a solid foundation and review your existing policies and practices, procedures. Make sure that you're good there before you start kind of moving forward into the new realm. Because especially when it comes to like community development, the definitions, they're evolving, but they're not really changing, right? They're just kind of
Right.
clarifying some things. So I'm telling my banks, make sure that you've got a good program already.
Yeah, they have a nice long runway now to get up to speed on the new CRA rule, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Super good. So, Roger, tell me, what kind of episodes can our guests expect to listen to in
Well,
the coming
I'm
weeks?
excited to announce I finally had a chance to record with a few people outside of you, and talk to some people, and that was a lot of fun. Earlier this week, I recorded with Tim Schenck. He is general counsel with the Kentucky Bankers Association. So right here near me in Kentucky, and so we stayed away from basketball because that was a disaster last time I mentioned that on the podcast. We stuck to him, um, and he's been working in DC, some lobbying efforts, working with regulators, CFPB, a few others, and we kind of just went through what he's been talking about with them. A big chunk of that was junk fees. He gave us a nice lowdown of what's going on in the junk fee area. I mean, really, we kind of talked about representment fees because that's been the big focus of pretty much every regulator. Um, and he's been doing some exciting things in Kentucky as well. They've been doing these fraud academies, they're starting to move them into other states as well. So it's a kind of this one-day education setup where they walk banks through what to expect with check fraud and other kinds of fraud too, and just get everyone on the same page from the challenger up to the compliance department space. And it's a really exciting thing. So he invited me or someone else on our team to go check it out sometime. And since I'm in their backyard, maybe that'll happen eventually. I can report
Yeah,
back
that
on
sounds
the
really
podcast.
cool.
But yeah, he's doing some exciting things there, so I'm looking forward to getting that episode out. But one episode,
And exciting too that you found somebody from Kentucky. I often forget that Kentucky exists until, of course, you and I
well,
got to know each other.
when this comes out, the
So,
Kentucky Derby will have just happened, so I'm sure the Kentucky will be top of mind then. And of course, there's the famous Kentucky Fried Chicken. So
okay, so missed opportunity. We could have worn the derby hats and eaten chicken on this episode
I thought
to be
about
fair.
breaking out the seersucker suit. Actually, I did not. I thought that might
Next
be a little distracting. Uh, well, so one other person I just had the pleasure to interview was actually a relative of one of our very own employees. I think anyone who is a Compliance Alliance member probably knows Victoria Stephen. She's my
agree.
esteemed boss. And I had the pleasure of interviewing her father, Kurt Stephen. Now, I'd asked my coworkers if they have any questions to ask Kurt about Victoria, and I had some interesting ones, but I decided I probably needed to steer clear of that for the sake of my own employment. So we stuck to bankruptcy, and he really gave us a nice overview of bankruptcy, as it's relevant to a banker. So, when you hear the word bankruptcy, Ashton, what do you think of?
Oh gosh, I never have to do that.
Well, that's kind of what I felt too as a lawyer. Even in private practice, this would come up, and I was like, I want to steer clear of that. That's a really kind of dense, complicated area of the law, and Kurt was able to provide a really high level overview that would make sense to a banker. And when I first think about bankruptcy, I think about how there's all these different chapters. Consumer regulations, we kind of call them an alphabet soup because there's Reg Z, Reg DG, what have you. With bankruptcy, it's kind of a number soup. There's chapter 7, 11, 13, and Kurt kind of explained what each of those are. Not to spoil anything, just the basics of what that is. There's two different approaches, I guess, that come up in our context quite a bit for bankruptcy. There's liquidation. That's where you take all of the debtor's assets, sell them, split the money to their creditors. And then there's chapters 11 and 13 that are reorganization. So that's when you have like a well-functioning business. Things just aren't going right for whatever reason. A trustee is appointed to help them right the ship and then get it flowing again and get their debtors or their creditors paid. And then I think there's a few buzzwords that come up with bankruptcy that bankers need to know of. There's the automatic stay. That's probably going to be one of the first things you hear about, and that's when you cannot demand payment anymore. You can't seek the debt anymore because they filed halted all proceedings there, and they're going to work it out through the court system. And then there's what's called a discharge, and that's what the debtor's hoping to get, a release of their debt because they're trying to start fresh. And then there's what's called a proof of claims. So that's what the debtor is going to file, or no, that's not what the debtor is going to file. The debtor files bankruptcy. The creditor files a proof of claim showing what debt they have so that they can get in line to get paid. And one thing that I'm sure comes up in your context too is liens, and there's lien priority, there's unsecured debts, secured debts, perfected debts, and that all comes into play here. And Kurt explains that, just determining who's going to get paid once bankruptcy is filed. I'm sure that was a lot there, and Kurt does a much better job than me of explaining what bankruptcy is. He's been doing bankruptcy work for 50 years now.
I'm excited to hear it. And I personally love this Bring Your Dad to Work Day that we are doing with compliance alliance attorneys. I think it's awesome. So I'm excited to listen to it because I'll be honest, as a compliance person, when I hear bankruptcy, I just think like, oh gosh, I know I need to ask questions. I don't even know what comes next.
He had a great idea of how to frame the conversation too. He said he wanted to just approach it as if, I was like a loan officer, first-time loan officer who had a customer file bankruptcy for the first time. So it's like, what questions should I ask? How should I get, off on the right foot to approach that?
Love it. Perfect. I think our guests will love that.
Should be helpful. It's a scary topic for most people.
Yeah. Like I said, personally, just hope I never end up there. Not on
right.
Well, as usual, if any of you in our audience are interested in joining us as a guest, please reach out. Admin@bankersalliance.org will get you to the right spot so that we can hook you up as a guest. And don't feel like you have to be, I don't know, have a resume 60 pages long to come join us. We have a lot of very esteemed guests, but we are happy to talk to anyone. So please reach out if you're interested.
And you don't have to be a relative of anybody on staff.
Good clarification. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, you don't have to be related. Perfect. All right. Well, let's sign off for the month of May. For everybody at home, that's Banking Matters.